Today, we're going to be breaking down some of the most creative, unique, and cool designs that I've seen this week for the FTC DECODE season. So as this ball rotates around, it's able to fall into this servo point. This is a new series I'm starting up called FTC Fridays, and the goal is to, every week on Fridays, to show off the cool different designs, the creative designs, and unique engineering that the community's been able to come up with. Be able to give some recognition to some things that teams are doing, and to hopefully give your team a bit more inspiration as you design your own robot for the FTC DECODE season. I'm Coach Pratt, and I've been teaching robotics design for over a decade. I've coached FTC teams to national championship winners and multiple Inspire Awards. And one of the best ways for you to design your own robot is getting some inspiration from others. So let's go take a look and see what other teams have done. So this is team 16010 Astra Machina, and they've got a full robot set up here to take a look at. I think they've done a pretty good job on a pretty functional prototype with a kind of a flywheel hooder. Now, they've shot it in such a way you can't actually take a look at everything they're doing, and I think that's kind of on purpose. But they kind of have a 2017 FRC style inspired flywheel here that is a pretty cool mechanism. They got a boot kicker intake, and then they have a large flywheel with a quick wood prototype for the outside. And it looks like probably a sheet of PLA or some sort of thin plastic they've just added on there. The thing I really like about this is this rapid prototyping clear with either a bandsaw or with a laser cutter. And as a flywheel, as long as they're in the correct place, it looks like they've got a pretty accurate point as well. Their intake, this is a little better lighting so we can actually see what their intake looks like. And they've got a few boot kickers with it looks like probably 2 or 3 of those Go Build a Rhino wheels, my guess. Clearly this axle is very long sticking out on there. Or is that the end of their drivetrain? No, I think that's the end of their axle. So they're powering it from down here to be able to adjust the size there. So pretty cool design. Nice job, Astra Machina. I think that this kind of triple boot kicker intake is pretty functional. And well, it clearly is, and it's able to pick it up and launch a ball quite a way. I'm not sure how many they're capable of holding inside of their hopper at the moment. Maybe it's just one, but perhaps they could let us know in the comments down below. Next up, we've got Dinonaut here, and they have a sort of double flywheel design. This one's cool because it's taking inspiration from things you see in real life. And you've probably seen this in football launchers or soccer launchers, soccer ball, or American football launchers. You may have seen these, or tennis ball launchers. It's a simple double flywheel design on a pitch. And I believe they have just a human player intaking from the top with a simple piece of plastic and some zip ties holding together. This almost looks like, I'm sure you've seen those folding binders that you use back in grade school. And it looks like they just kind of cut one of those up as a way of holding their hopper in. But if we take a look at their design actually running, this double flywheel design is working pretty well for launching a ball up. And it looks like in the back, they have this little arm that kicks and kind of scoops to push that piece up into that flywheel. So they come back, grab the human player, and then they use this little, it looks like a little plastic tab to be able to push their part into the flywheel. Not super accurate, obviously, and, well, when the flywheel is at speed, it's actually pretty accurate. So as a first prototype, excellent job here, Team 27572. Then we've got a few different robots here from Oz FTC. I can only assume it's Australia FTC. And they've got what looks like a triple flywheel launcher here. So they have one wheel that may be for the intake, because green was my guess. And then as that robot pushes that object up, it looks like there's a secondary flywheel at the top. So rather than having them horizontal, they've actually stacked them vertically. And it looks like a pretty accurate, provided they're in the exact right position, and maybe not. It seems to be pretty accurate as a first prototype, and overall, pretty good work on that. Looks like they have sort of a rounded Tetrix, maybe a rev wheel here, and then a couple ones up top to be able to push that in. Pretty neat index launcher. Pretty neat flywheel launcher. With most of these now, one thing I want you to keep in mind, and this is not to tear down any other teams, because I totally get it. These robot in 30-hour reveals typically show when their prototype is working under perfect conditions and super ideal conditions. So if you are a rookie team, you're looking to say, how are these people doing this in the first week? Recognize that typically teams only share their successes and share their wins. Now, I'm not saying that this thing doesn't work consistently all the time. I'm saying I don't know if it does work all the time or not because I haven't been able to see it in purpose. And I'm not assuming that they can't, but recognize that when you see a lot of these shots, you're going to see the best side for the teams they're trying to show. And I think there's something important to think about that. But their design is clearly capable of launching from the far side. They also have what looks like a sort of over-centered linkage, or not over-centered linkage. It is a linkage that is attached to a spring-loaded bar. So they've got a wheel here. They have a secondary linkage or a 2-bar linkage that's connecting those. So as it spins around, it pulls against that spring, and then it kicks really hard to be able to make themselves a launcher on that side. It's going to be interesting to see this year whether spring-loaded launchers do well or whether flywheel launchers tend to do a little well. The thing about a flywheel is you have to wait for the speed back up, but a spring load, it will always have hopefully should have the exact same tension all the way across. So that'll be interesting. We're going to move on to High Five Robotics here out of Romania, and they've got a really cool prototype for a spindexer here, or an indexer. So what they do is they can take their ball, drop it inside the sort of hopper up at the top, and then they have a hole cut through the bottom, and this centerpiece is able to rotate around. So as this ball rotates around, it's able to fall into this servo point, and it looks like they have a color sensor mounted that she's pointing out to now. And then if they want to launch a purple, they can simply move that arm, drops it down into their flywheel point. I think that's a really interesting starting point as a indexer so that you can get tracks for patterns. And obviously this is super rough. It's a cardboard prototype, but this is exactly what you should be seeing and doing in that first week or 2 or even 3. Lots of low fidelity cardboard prototypes. Get it out rapid, get it out quick. Does this work? Does it not work? Get proof of concepts. Nice job there, High Five Robotics. Then we're going to go over to the Fun Robotics Network channel here. They had their Robot in 30 Hours event with 10 different teams. And I want to highlight the 9,225 Dynamic Social Club. They have a similar looking double flywheel shooter down here, but they have a 3-index hopper up at the top. Or not index, but they've got a 3-ball hopper. And I just want to show you how well you can get a double flywheel working. Now I'm imagining that they're probably pausing to be able to get their flywheel spin back up. And it looks like the second one was probably a little bit early with my guess. Their flywheels might not have been at max RPM. And I believe that this wasn't a quick autonomous demonstration to be able to show off 3 balls being kicked in. In any case, again, this was built in 30 hours, and that's super impressive to get something that works so well. One thing that I think is interesting looking at a lot of these designs is that there may be a bit of a differential between, is it better to intake or is it better just to go to the human player and have them drop in the balls? Because then the human player can do that indexing for you, especially when it comes time for doing a pattern. And then I'm not sure where it's going to be at. We'll have to see where things end up going. My imagination is during the main part of teleop, being able to intake on your own is probably going to be better. But at the end, that may be a really easy way of getting your pattern is going back to your human player, getting 3 balls, launching them in for the pattern, going back to human player, getting another 3, and then going up to launch to be able to make sure you're getting your pattern. And it's going to be interesting to see where teams go and where this strategy comes out. And you're going to have to do a lot of simulations yourself to be able to know which strategy is going to work for you. Now let's take a look at the Iron Rain here. And I think they just have a really interesting looking flywheel. This is taken from, I'm sure you've probably seen those yo-yo toys. It almost looks a bit like a yo-yo. It has that really harsh V. It's almost like a gigantic V groove bearing. And I just think it's a really interesting intake to take a look at. And now they are mentioning that this is a prototype and they're working through a lot of different problems, but I think it's a really unique way of taking over that challenge and to not just have straight wheels. So it might be something that's worthwhile to take a look at. One thing I will say is that looking at flywheels, the more surface area you have contacting the ball, the less likely you are to slip. And slipping is really where you start to reduce a lot of that power as you're launching these things out. This is another fun wheel. They've got a 96 millimeter on a 6,000 RPM, just to show you what a hooded flywheel can do. And this thing is capable of launching quite fast. Again, super ideal conditions here. They're clearly using the old 2017 fuel balls, but just to show you what is capable of with some sort of hooded shooter. Some of these things can get some pretty serious power just on a single motor. The last thing I want to show off here is a couple different lifting designs. Of course, I have the lifting design I shared out in my video with using Offset Robotics telescopic elevator. But this Swift and ItCan Robotics has a really interesting, make sure I mute that, has a really interesting way of doing the same thing then. They've got a similar flat plate design with a few different Masumi slides to be able to lift their robot up at the end. Really creative solution. I think maybe centering this back is a pretty good plate. Now, the one question we need to decide on a Q&A is whether a plate this large is within the game rules or not. In my opinion, the purpose of one of these rules to not have a large plate is to stop your robot from having momentum, acting like a brake. So if you were to drive forward really fast, drop this plate down, it would be like a braking surface on the floor so that you could be able to rotate yourself around faster. If teams are using it in that respect, it's definitely against the rules. I think it's yet to be determined whether this is still within the rules or not within the rules. As my reading of the rules, because it's not grabbing the floor as a part of trying to increase your friction force down to it, it's really just a base support plate. I would have a hard time seeing this being against the rules, but again, we'll have to wait for an official Q&A to be able to come out on that. And the last one here in a similar kind of build, this is a Robot in 30 Hours channel, and they have a really interesting sort of backup flip mechanism here. Now, one thing that is interesting on this, so they just kind of have a large pivot point. This is a pretty cool design. I quite like that. It's not resting on here. One thing to note is you cannot go beyond your horizontal expansion limits of 18 inches or 45.37 centimeters. So as this thing is pivoting up on an angle, I believe right here, I think that this flapper is still within that 18 inches. Pretty close though. So they'd have to watch this flapper doesn't go outside of that 18-inch point. But as a first prototype in 30 hours again, having a big plate with a little 2-bar linkage to be able to push it up, super cool little design. So a lot of really cool builds done by the FTC community. If you'd like your robot or think you have a creative mechanism that you'd like to feature out in a future FTC Fridays, fill out the form down below and maybe I'll feature your team's creative mechanism on the next FTC Fridays. As always, I hope you found that helpful for inspiration, and best of luck out there to all the teams this season, and maybe we'll meet each other out on the competition field.